Okay, it's 7.
Get started. All right. Well, welcome everybody on this auspicious evening to come out and come to a Zoom talk. We appreciate you being here. I am Katie Simon, and I'm the interim executive director of the Flannery O'Connor Institute for the Humanities, and I'm delighted to have two speakers here on O'Connor and music. And we're so excited about this. I've previewed some of these talks and I'm really excited. We are being recorded, so keep that in mind. And also, if you wouldn't mind keeping your audio off so there's no background noise unless you're speaking, unless you're one of the speakers. And I will, in a minute, turn this over to Bruce Gentry, who will introduce our speakers, but I wanted to just give you a little information about the Flannery O'Connor Institute and some of the cool things we're doing. In November, we have a bunch of stuff in November. We're just like ramping up for the 100th birthday. So we're doing a really ambitious suite of talks. We will have our Flannery O'Connor Book Club November 21st this month, both at 2 p.m. at the Writers Museum in Eatonton on the Square, and it'll be at 7 p.m. on Zoom as well. That talk will be about, or that book club is about the children's books. There they are, visuals, 2 picture books based on O'Connor's life. The King of the Birds and The Strange Birds of Flannery O'Connor. So that should be fun and easy. You don't have to do a lot of prep for that one. We do have 2 in-person events coming up next week, November 14th. We have Farrell O'Gorman joining us for an in-person lecture, 7 p.m. or 6 p.m. on the 14th on the topic of Cormac McCarthy and Flannery O'Connor. And his talk is entitled, wait, this one doesn't have the talk title, Legacies, Links, and something else. That should be really good. We also have an in-person event on the 12th next week, which is a kind of celebration and roundup of our final, our U.S. Department of Education grant. And we're doing a podcast giveaway. We'll do another children's book talk with interviews with the illustrators and writers. And then we have the podcast workshop for people to use, learn how to use the podcast equipment at 5:30. So a big kind of event that day. Also have been kind of saying, and, save the date, the week of March 25th, 2025, Flannery O'Connor's centennial 100th birthday. We are going to have an entire week of great events at Georgia College, celebrating every day, rounding up with a bluegrass festival. So we'll stay tuned for that. And if you're not already on our mailing list, you can put your email in the chat. Make sure you get our newsletter. We have great newsletter, and we're updating it monthly, sending out invites, links, that kind of thing. So make sure you post in the chat if you want to be on our mailing list, and I'll make sure you get on there. So without further ado, and we have so much going on with O'Connor's birthday, and this talk is part of that, and we're excited to host tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to Bruce, and he will introduce the speakers. And if you have questions along the way, you can put them in the chat. You can also just raise your hand at the end, and we'll have plenty of time, I think, for a Q&A. All right, Bruce, take it away.
Okay. I'm going to introduce our speakers in the order in which they will speak. Okay. First up will be Irwin Streight. Here's the show and tell. Here's his book that we're talking about tonight, Flannery at the Grammys. He is a full professor in the Department of English, Culture, and Communication at the Royal Military College of Canada, so he is somewhat less nervous about the election than the rest of us. He is just as nervous as the rest. Okay. He is co-editor with R. Neil Scott of Flannery O'Connor, The Contemporary Reviews, and co-editor with Roxanne Hardy of Reading the Boss, Interdisciplinary Approaches to the Works of Bruce Springsteen. His monograph, Flannery at the Grammys, was recently published by the University Press of Mississippi. He has been working on this subject for quite a long time. And I could say the same thing about Monica Miller. You know, perhaps most famous with an O'Connor crowd for her book Dear Regina, although she has other books I'm about to tell you about. She is an associate professor of English and the coordinator of graduate writing programs at Middle Georgia State University in Macon. She is the author of Being Ugly, Southern Women Writers and Social Rebellion. She's the editor of Dear Regina, as I mentioned before, and she's co-editor of a book called The Techie South. And with that, I will hand things over to Irwin Streight, and he will get us going.
Well, thank you, Bruce. Thank you. Yes, it has been a long time going, and I must say that along the way, Bruce offered great encouragement and published the first work of the works that I did on O'Connor's influence. And so thank you for that, Bruce, and for that introduction. Also, thank you, Katie, and the Flannery O'Connor Institute for the Humanities for hosting this event, and Jessica McSwain, who did a lot of administrative work as well. And all of you who have chosen to spend an hour on this very significant Tuesday evening, in which, yes, Canadian, my news flash is the Canadian government is preparing for whatever outcome in the US. It has a great effect on us, and well, we'll all be watching. Thank you for the putting the book up, Bruce. It saves me doing it, but that's what my talk is based on tonight, this recent book on Flannery at the Grammys, which explores what one reviewer calls O'Connor's oversized cultural impact on contemporary music. The book examines O'Connor's arc of influence on a suite of celebrated singer-songwriters and pop music groups, most notably multiple Grammy Award winners Bruce Springsteen, whom I saw Sunday night in Toronto, myself and 20,000 others. Most notably Bruce Springsteen, Lucinda Williams, alternative musician, composer, and author Nick Cave, and indie pop artist Sufjan Stevens, along with supergroups R.E.M. and U2. My research benefits from the work of my co-presenter tonight, Monica Miller's insightful commentary in the Flannery O'Connor Review on the pioneers of indie rock, R.E.M. And if you have not heard of Colonel J.D. Wilkes and the legendary Shack Shakers, you'll discover that there is a Southern rockabilly band out there whose recordings sound like how O'Connor's fiction reads, songs that, as Wilkes invokes, quote, draw large and startling figures. My paper makes the suggestion that within her small corpus of short stories, Flannery O'Connor created one rock and roll rebel, her juvenile delinquent Rufus Florida Johnson, the antagonist of her late story, The Lame Shall Enter First. Her roustabout and reluctant prophet character Rufus, writes O'Connor in a letter to novelist John Hawkes, is, quote, one of Tarwater's terrible cousins, end quote. And like Tarwater, Rufus appears to be running Jonah-like from his prophetic calling. The emblematic surname Johnson signifies his pedigree as a prophet in the making. Rufus is a son of John, O'Connor's prophet of choice, the Baptist. O'Connor likely knew nothing about 1930s Mississippi bluesman Robert Johnson, one of the progenitors of rock music, inspiring luminaries Led Zeppelin, the Rolling Stones, and Eric Clapton, among others. Unintentionally, surely, but fortuitous for my argument, Rufus' family name and initial thus also link him to rock and roll history. Even Rufus' hairstyle, which O'Connor describes as, quote, hung in a flat forelock across the side of his forehead, end quote, identifies him with the coiffed looks of rock and roll teen idols of the late 1950s to early 1960s. Moreover, and evidently, Rufus is identified with Elvis Presley. Her caveats aside, O'Connor was not completely oblivious to the popular culture and early rock and roll music of her day. Former executive director of the Andalusia Foundation, Craig Amison, confirmed in an email that, along with 60 million other Americans, O'Connor likely would have viewed Elvis' first appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show in September 1956, a performance that surely informs Rufus' hip-swiveling Elvis imitation shortly after he enters Shepard's house. Rummaging through the dresser drawers in the bedroom of Norton's recently deceased mother, Rufus retrieves a faded corset and straps it on like a campy androgynous rock performer. He begins, quote, to snap his fingers and turn his hips from side to side, and quote, as he sings an imitative version of Shake, Rattle, and Roll, the million-selling rock and roll hit of 1954 by the curly forelocked Bill Haley and his Comets, also recorded by Elvis. Gonna rock, rattle, and roll. Can't please that woman to save my doggone soul, Rufus sings. In Rufus Johnson, I suggest, O'Connor appears to understand the sensibilities, familial and social forces, and often conflicted soul of the rock and roller. The fictional Johnson uncannily shares many life circumstances and characteristics with the O'Connor-influenced contemporary music figures that I examine in my book. Many of the contemporary bands and songwriters who bear evidence of O'Connor's influence, I argue, are what she calls, quote, Christ-haunted. That is, as I understand the term, they're conscious of the salvation story of the Christian gospel. They have perhaps known or encountered its transforming truths, yet rejected its mystical imperatives and creedal claims. You must be born again, as the Gospel of John puts it. In her literary manifesto, the fiction writer and his country, published early in her career in an edited book of statements by writers on their art, The Living Novel, a symposium, 1957, O'Connor states her case as a writer who holds strongly to theological truths. Quote, I see by the standpoint of Christian orthodoxy. This means that for me, the meaning of life is centered in our redemption in Christ, and that what I see in the world, I see in its relation to that. It is not overly reductive to say that O'Connor wrote 2 novels and published 19 short stories, all ultimately intended to reveal to secular readers and to nominal Christians alike that humanity is in need of redemption through Christ. Everything she wrote converges on the figure and fact of Jesus. And O'Connor recognized that this was not an easy position to make evident in realistic fiction. As she remarks in her reluctantly added author's note to the second edition of Wise Blood, quote, that belief in Christ is to some a matter of life and death has been a stumbling block for readers who would prefer to think it a matter of no great consequence. For the majority of popular songwriters examined in my study, sometime in their formative years, they were bound to or stumbled by a strident strain of Christian religion, and like Rufus, may even have been subjected to forms of abuse by religious figures. Bruce Springsteen recounts his constraining Catholic childhood in his 2016 autobiography, Born to Run, including several accounts of physical abuse by nuns and priests in his parochial school and parish freehold in New Jersey in the 1950s. He tells a story of a nun who stuffed him in a garbage can and said that that's where he belonged. And he says that once as an altar boy, he dropped the chalice during Mass and the priest struck him right at that moment. So he has several stories that suggest that there were fairly adverse encounters that he had in his Catholic childhood. Lucinda Williams' fire and brimstone preacher grandfather on her mother's side left his mark in many ways on her own soul through her unstable mother and consequently her own mistreatment during what she calls, quote, a difficult childhood. Possibly the tensions at home while young Lucinda was living in Macon may have prompted her father Miller to bring her along during several of his monthly visits to Andalusia, as he recalls in a remembrance published in Sarah Gordon's Celebration of Genius collection. Sufjan Stevens' cult-following parents created an unstable family life for their 4 children, and even so, in his late childhood, when his father announced one day that the family had converted to Catholicism, as Stevens lyrically accounts in the song He Woke Me Up Again on the O'Connor-influenced album Seven Swans, released in 2004. Stevens was abandoned by his mentally ill and drug-abusing mother when he was 1 year old, and tells stories of having to go door to door with his 3 siblings as children, selling dolls made of Kleenex tissues in order to obtain money to buy food for themselves. Like several of the celebrated contemporary songwriters whose O'Connor-influenced art is examined in the Flannery at the Grammys book, O'Connor's wise-blooded characters are offspring or descendants of religious extremists, and Rufus Johnson is especially so. We read that he was raised in a shack without water and electricity by a physically abusive grandfather who has abandoned Rufus and retreated to the hills with other extremists to form a survivalist cult that hopes to outlast the approaching apocalypse. One of the commonalities that I did not explore in my study is that many of the accomplished contemporary songwriters and rock performers have revealed in interviews and autobiographies that in their formative years, they were abandoned emotionally or physically by a parent, most often a father. And this, of course, is true of O'Connor, who lost her adoring father to lupus when she was at a formative age of 15. Bruce Springsteen, Lucinda Williams, Mary Gauthier, Sufjan Stevens, Nick Cave, Tom Waits, U2's Bono, all were abandoned or bereft by a parent, Gauthier at birth, Stevens at 1 year old, and the others in their teen years through death or divorce or extreme dysfunction. I did not know what to do critically with this common denominator that links the A-list contemporary musicians in my study with a biographical detail in O'Connor's life, but that's another point of convergence between these artists who have acknowledged the arc of her influence on their sensibilities in art. Her deceased father, Edward O'Connor, whom she adored, is barely mentioned in The Habit of Being letters, though in a rare revelation in a pair of letters to Betty Hester in the summer of 1956, Flannery notes that her father was an aspiring writer and that she is, quote, extra happy, end quote, at the thought of that her own writing is, quote, a fulfillment of what he wanted to do himself. Brad Gooch describes Flannery, quote, as a mirror image of her clear-eyed father. But 5 or 6 years on from his death, young 20-something Flannery at the Iowa Writers' Workshop makes no mention of him in her daily letters to her mother, which Monica Miller has recently published in Dear Regina. Fathers are largely absent in O'Connor's fiction, and those who appear like Bailey and Shepard and Raber and the briefly glimpsed father of Harry Bevel are all ineffectual or fail to protect their children from what at the time would appear to be destructive forces. In a 2012 interview article in The New Yorker, Bruce Springsteen acknowledges T-Bone Burnett's pained observation that rock and roll is, more often than not, quote, one embarrassing scream of daddy. It's only well in the rear view in his late 30s that Springsteen, whose verbally abusive and alcoholic father was eventually diagnosed as bipolar, can sing, quote, my father's house shines hard and bright. It stands like a beacon calling me in the night. Though he adds that the sins committed there still, quote, lie unatoned. Rufus' father died before he was born, and his mother is serving time in a state penitentiary. His upbringing, including an absent father and forms of neglect and abuse, combined with his, quote, fanatic intelligence and transgressive tendencies, give Rufus the bona fides of a rock and roll rebel. As might be observed particularly of the O'Connor-influenced punk and heavy metal artist explored in my book, and one of the surprising things is in my research was the extent to which O'Connor had influenced writers and artists in those musical genres. As might be observed, like many of them, Rufus is both Christ-haunted and somewhat bedeviled. A kind of, quote, popular Satanism, as one critic calls it, informs the works and stagecraft of artists in the metal genres of rock music, whose musical misreadings, I claim, of O'Connor's Wise Blood are examined in a chapter of my book. 14-year-old Rufus explains his criminal inclinations and behavior by declaring to Shepard, quote, Satan, he has me in his power. Later in the story, Shepard's confident declaration, three times I'm going to save you, is met with his confessional retort, quote, nobody can save me but Jesus. Rock and roll can be a highway to hell or a stairway to heaven, and songwriters and bands examined in Flannery at the Grammys appear to have taken O'Connor along for the ride on either journey. It's Jesus or the devil, as young Tarwater acknowledges his options in The Violent Bared Away, or more often as Mary Gauthier sings in her signature song Mercy Now, quote, we dangle between hell and hallowed ground. Which way a character will go is one of O'Connor's primary concerns in her fictions. Rufus' story contains many of the tropes that can be found in the biographies of the Grammy Award-winning musicians who acknowledge O'Connor's arc of influence on their song art and writerly sensibilities. Though not a practicing Catholic, and it might be added, theologically at odds with the teachings of the church, as he notes in his autobiography, Bruce Springsteen has remarked that the Catholic doctrines and sacramental practices that informed his upbringing created in him what he calls, quote, an internal landscape, a religious sensibility and underlying redemptive narrative that has shaped his songwriting and directed the lives of the characters in his many first-person narrative songs. O'Connor literalizes the metaphor of an inwardly informing and nourishing gospel truth by having Rufus Johnson eat pages of the Bible in a remarkable scene of defiant spiritual transformation. To confirm to the God-denying shepherd that he truly believes the biblical doctrine of salvation, that like the evangelist after whom he is named, he has been explaining to shepherd's son Norton. Johnson takes the Bible he's been reading at the dinner table, tears out several pages, and swallows them, exclaiming 3 times, "I believe it." Like the religiously tattooed O.E. Parker, Rufus too becomes an emblem of the uppercase word made flesh, a Christ one. His transformation symbolically transacted as he literally devours the scriptures, his prophetic destiny accepted and perhaps complete. Just as O'Connor's reluctant young prophet, Francis Marion Tarwater, has one divinely appointed task to perform in baptizing the child bishop, so Rufus Johnson, her rock and roll rebel prophet, may have only a limited engagement. As a son of John the Baptizer, who prepared the way for the Christ, Rufus has come to shake up Shepherd's life and, subspecie eternitatis, nefariously to save the child Norton's. He is what Mary Gauthier calls, quote, a truth teller, come to speak truth to the devil's lies. He has come, as O'Connor writes, as, quote, the sounder of hearts, preparing the way for Shepherd's self-revelation and ultimate repentance at the end of the story. That may be the sum of it, and that is a calling worthy enough for a prophet in O'Connor country. We are left with the impression that Rufus Johnson, like so many teen idols of the 1950s and 1960s, will be a one-hit wonder. That O'Connor crafted a story in the early 1960s featuring a young prophet rock and roller belies her professed ignorance of the popular culture of her day. While claiming to have no ear for music, O'Connor had enough familiarity with the pop songs of the early 1960s to remark famously in a letter written 15 February 1964, quote, all classical music sounds alike to me, and all the rest of it sounds like the Beatles. Less than a week earlier, on 9 February, the Beatles made their celebrated American debut on the Ed Sullivan Show, a culturally transforming media event watched by more than 70 million Americans, among them presumably O'Connor, who had a television in her bedroom at the time, according to Craig Amison. O'Connor's comic explanation that she was possessed of, quote, the original tin ear and had no appreciation whatsoever for music of any kind, thus appears to be somewhat overstated. In possession of a cast-off record player sometime after Christmas 1963, a gift from a group of Dominican sisters in Atlanta, O'Connor resolved, quote, to educate herself, if possible, end quote, in the meaningful pleasures of music. Over what would prove to be the final months of her life, she made her way through a box of evidently both classical and pop records sent by her friend and correspondent Thomas Stritch, a professor of American Studies at Notre Dame and evidently a music critic as well. In a letter to Stritch dated 11 February 1964, she asks him to send some music reviews that he had written, explaining, quote, I would like to see how knowledgeable folks talk about music. And she confesses remarkably, quote, this is the first time I've listened to music except when I was at Yaddo, the writers' colony in upstate New York that she'd left 15 years earlier in February 1949. In one of her last letters, written 28 June 1964, just weeks before her death, O'Connor confides to Stritch, quote, the records are a real boon, and when I'm not working, I'm listening to them. She remarks somewhat knowingly on enjoying a classical record with a, quote, four-hand piano Chopin thing, and adds, quote, there is a point in it where the peafowls join in. Would O'Connor, like her fellow Southern novelist, Catholic, and friend Walker Percy, have written a fan letter to Bruce Springsteen? Or agree with Father Andrew Greeley, who labeled Springsteen, quote, a Catholic Meistersinger? She had no qualms about letting young Lucinda Williams chase her peacocks. Would she have purchased that new record player she once considered buying rather than the pair of swans she ordered instead, and listened over and over to Williams' Grammy Award-winning rockabilly song, Get Right with God, with its imagery influenced by Wise Blood? Would she have nodded approvingly on hearing Mary Gaucher's Wheel Within the Wheel, with its motley parade of freaks and outsiders, as in Ruby Turpin's vision, winding their way heavenward along, quote, Eternity Street? Had she lived a fuller life in years, until the turn of the century, as might have been expected for an American woman born in 1925, Flannery O'Connor would have discovered in the works of contemporary bands and songwriters whose art she has influenced that, like the music she came late to appreciate, there are places in their songs where, again, the peafowls might join in. Thank you.
Wow.
Hey,
Thank you.
now, yeah, we'll now hand it over to Monica Miller, and I will, for those of you who came late, let's wave about a copy of Dear Regina.
Thank you, Bruce. I'm going to share my screen. And all right, you can see that? Cool. All right, I want to share Irwin's thanks to Katie and Bruce and Jess for organizing this tonight, and also my appreciation for Irwin. Both I'm excited to share this evening's event with him, and also Flannery at the Grammys is just such great work. I'm really I've enjoyed reading it, and I really appreciate all the work that's gone into it. So thank you for all of that. My title tonight, It Was Punk, comes from O'Connor's own fondness for that phrase, it was punk. The letters that she wrote to her mother from Iowa while she was in graduate school, she used it often to complain about the movies that she had seen and not enjoyed. When she was writing these letters in the 1940s, punk meant of poor quality, devoid of worth or sense, poor, second-rate, inferior, or lousy. It also meant amateurish. So I will admit that reading these letters today, I do feel an enjoyable sense of cognitive dissonance. I've had her use of the word punk in this way. And it's one of the verbal tics that I have picked up from her letters, along with declaring that Triscuits are mighty fine. So several years ago, in fact, it's 10 years ago now, I published an article in the Flannery O'Connor Review about O'Connor's influence on punk music that, like Irwin, I was really surprised at once you start digging at what an incredible collection of punk and metal and industrial musicians she has influenced. Beginning with Ministry's sampling of Wise Blood and Jesus Built My Hot Rod, I discovered an entire playlist of punkish songs that referenced or were inspired by O'Connor's work, such as PJ Harvey's Joy, and that's her album in the middle of there, and Gang of Four's No Man with a Good Car. And you can hear snippets of these on a couple of these on the Irwin's music that was sent out earlier. And there's also the musician Jim Thirlwell had a band called Wise Blood. So in that article, I noted that O'Connor observed that many of her stories had a moment of grace that excited the devil to frenzy. And it was this moment that I thought was striking a chord with a lot of these punk bands. I still think that's true in a lot of cases, but I've realized that there's actually another aspect of O'Connor's work that I think resonates even more strongly with the punk ethos. So many scholars, including Irwin and myself, have written about the influence that O'Connor's had on a really wide spectrum of musicians, from U2 to Gang of Four. Some have argued that many musicians, especially punk and metal ones, are responding to the violence in O'Connor's work, or share affinities for the Southern Gothic. Others have noted how musicians such as Bruce Springsteen and Nick Cave have aspired to emulate her storytelling in their lyrics. Tonight, I want to consider her own explanation of her work, specifically her own statement to the hard of hearing you shout, as an articulation of what I am identifying as being at the heart of the punk impulse in her work. And I'm going to consider this the significance of the parallels between this impulse in punk music and in O'Connor's fiction. So from punk's earlier meanings of poor quality, in the early part of the 20th century, the terms punk, punk rock, and punk music emerged to describe the genre of rock music originating in the late 1970s, characterized by deliberately outrageous or confrontational attitude, energetic and often chaotic performance, and frequently simple or repetitive song structures. To be fair, the current use of the word punk to describe the music, aesthetics, and political stances that have grown out of the 1970s punk music subculture, the use of this word has really widely varying uses now, and my usage today is certainly not a complete one. As Black Flag singer and punk icon Henry Rollins explained in a 2019 interview, you ask 20 people what punk means to them, and you might get 20 very different answers. It's almost like talking about someone's religion, and that you must tread respectfully and with great care. So for my purposes, I'm defining the punk impulse in O'Connor's work that has inspired songs such as Ministry's Jesus Built My Hot Rod and Gang of Four's No Man with a Good Car with O'Connor's own words. Her frequently quoted explanation from her 1957 talk, The Fiction Writer in His Country, about why she used such graphic, violent imagery in her work. Famously, she explained that when you can assume that your audience holds the same beliefs that you do, you can relax and use more normal means of talking to it. When you have to assume that it does not, then you have to make your vision apparent by shock. To the hard of hearing, you shout, and for the almost blind, you draw large and startling figures. So O'Connor's explanation here resonates with an important aspect of punk music to me, of its drive to call attention to hypocrisy and images and issues of the marginalized. Compare her famous line, for example, to this definition of punk given by Steve Diggle, who's the guitarist for the foundational British band The Buzzcocks. He said that punk is about waking people's consciousness up. It's your life, don't sleep through it. There's a lot of somnambulists around, sleepwalkers controlled by society. I think punk stopped and questioned that kind of socialization for a while. It's an assault on the senses, and the audience has to react to that in some way. And indeed, in O'Connor's work, violence is similarly about waking people's consciousnesses up. So much of punk is about seeing something happening, good or bad, and making a lot of noise about it, whether it's Tribe 8 singing about date rape or the Sex Pistols singing about corrupt politics. An important aspect of punk is about making a lot of noise about something that needs attention. And this noise has two primary purposes. First, it gets people's attention and hopefully inspires at least an awareness of an issue, hopefully even action. And second, it's importantly a cathartic experience for the artist to make noise about an issue that's important to them. Feeling heard by an audience can be quite satisfying and validating. As O'Connor explained about the violence at A Good Man Is Hard to Find, she said, quote, "Violence is strangely capable of returning my characters to reality and preparing them to accept their moment of grace." In this same talk, she also said, "This story has been called grotesque, but I prefer to call it literal. A good story is literal in the same sense that a child's drawing is literal. When a child draws, he doesn't intend to distort, but to set down exactly what he sees, and as his gaze is direct, he sees the lines that create motion." O'Connor's description of the literal here as childlike and direct resonates with the DIY or do-it-yourself, stripped-back simplicity of punk music. Further, in discussing violence itself in her fiction, she says, "We hear many complaints about the prevalence of violence in modern fiction, and it is always assumed that this violence is a bad thing and meant to be an end in itself. With the serious writer, violence is never an end in itself. It is the extreme situation that best reveals what we are essentially, and I believe these are times when writers are more interested in what we are essentially than in the tenor of our daily lives. The man in the violent situation reveals those qualities least dispensable in his personality, those qualities which are all he will have to take into eternity with him." Again, this writerly approach to revealing the essence of characters, stripping away the details of the tenor of our daily lives, is an aesthetic choice that I see as being in alignment with punk music's rejection of what many saw as the overproduced, overly layered stadium and progressive rock that had become popular in the 1970s. Writer Aaron Lake Smith wrote about this in an article earlier this year in Commonweal magazine, in which he describes his attraction to punk music and politics as a source of spiritual fulfillment. He writes, "It wasn't the harshness of religious education that led me away from the church and toward politics. It was the blandness, the absence of true intensity or spirit. Late 20th century American Protestantism seemed soft and flabby. I sought and found the Holy Spirit elsewhere in punk music, which quickly led to anarchist hardcore music, radical politics, rioting, rallies, and trips across the world to disrupt World Economic Forum meetings." I'm suggesting that the punk impulse in O'Connor's work involves using startling violence to wake the audience up to important truths, using an aesthetically stripped down and direct style to convey what is essential in the story, character, or message. For my remaining time today, I want to identify two moments in O'Connor's work that I see as vividly displaying this punk impulse, one of which has inspired a song, and one of which may be too punk for punk, although if Steve Albini were still alive, he might have considered basing a song on it. The first moment I want to talk about is the character of Joy Hulga in Good Country People. Her philosophy-fueled rebellious attitude against her provincial home life is, of course, quite rock and roll. One only wishes that she might have encountered Marlon Brando's character in On the Waterfront, who famously answered the question, "Johnny, what are you rebelling against?" with "What have you got?" But more importantly, as I've already written about elsewhere, I'm particularly interested in Joy Hulga's aesthetic choices that reject the expectations of appropriate feminine appearance, aesthetic choices which are themselves a form of punk expression, I would say. Joy Hulga stomps around, quote, "She could walk without making the awful noise, but she made it. Mrs. Hopewell was certain because it was ugly sounding. She wears a 6-year-old skirt and a yellow sweatshirt with a faded cowboy on a horse embossed on it. She thought this was funny. Mrs. Hopewell thought it was idiotic and showed simply that she was still a child." And of course, this passage contains one of my favorite descriptions of O'Connor's, that Joy Hulga looked at nice young men as if she could smell their stupidity. I've written about this character and other female characters in the work of Southern women writers who choose an appearance that others deem as ugly. The strategy is certainly at the heart of many punk narratives, as exemplified in the 1982 movie, Ladies and Gentlemen, The Fabulous Stains. In this film, Diane Lane plays Corinne Burns, the lead singer of the all-girl punk band The Stains. The film contains a pivotal makeover scene in which Corinne shaves and dyes her hair to a black and white skunk look, dons heavy makeup, a see-through blouse, and a pair of bikini briefs for her new stage looks. So there she is with her red lipstick, flame eyeshadow. So in this scene, she uses markers of sexy femininity in a rebellious anti-sexy ensemble. For example, for eyeshadow, she uses red lipstick applied to look like flames. Corinne's rejection of accepted femininity echoes that of Joy Hulga's. The fact that Joy Hulga is the subject of PJ Harvey's song Joy certainly points to the punk impulse at the heart of the character, as do the many testimonials that have been written and spoken by women who cheer on Joy Hulga, exemplified by the blog post Hulga C'est Moi by scholar Bethany Edstrom. So there's this joyous side of the punk impulse in puncturing illusions and reveling in making noise. However, there's also the violent, troubling side of punk, which is also certainly present in O'Connor's work and quite central to my premise. For me, one of the most troubling stories that O'Connor wrote was The River, which ends with the death of young Harry Ashfield in his attempt at self-baptism. Even before this upsetting ending, though, in a more lighthearted vein, we can see Harry's actions, his discovery, for example, that the way to get new picture books was to tear up the ones he had, as resonating with the rock and roll and later punk lyrics to rip it up and start again. What also resonates is his desire to be part of something bigger than himself. Coming from a home in which everything was a joke, his baptism is a revelation, and when he is told that while you didn't even count before, his baptism has changed him, and you count now. Certainly, this resonates with Aaron Lake Smith's account of finding meaning and identity within his punk community, a story which has been told by many who have found acceptance within such communities. But of course, the story does not end here. The River, to me, along with stories like The Lame Shall Enter First, A Good Man is Hard to Find, and The Violent Bear It Away, are particularly difficult stories because they end with the death of children. They are powerful stories, certainly, but difficult to read and especially troubling in the current context of so many children's deaths in the news due to school shootings. And here I want to recognize how much I appreciate Robert Brinkmeyer's recognition of how reading O'Connor's work today, in his words, "In an age of terrorism," puts O'Connor's stark vision and its demands on her readers in a new and quite disturbing context that I believe forces us to rethink our reading of her. So in reading such difficult scenes, I think of poet Cesar A. Cruz's statement that's recently been quoted by and attributed to Banksy, that art is meant to comfort the disturbed and disturb the comforted. O'Connor did not intend for her work to be easy to read. The thing is, as I have considered O'Connor's statement that to the hard of hearing you shout, as being central to the punk impulse in her work, I see how there are parallels between how her work can be misinterpreted, as well as the messages at the heart of a lot of punk music are also misinterpreted. Both the violence in O'Connor's work and the violence and noise in punk music complicate the binary understanding of signal to noise. What if the noise is supposed to be the signal? It's true that when trying to communicate with someone who doesn't hear well, there is an impulse to shout. However, if you actually are trying to talk to somebody who's hard of hearing, shouting often makes it worse. It helps to speak louder, certainly, but also to speak more slowly and to articulate your words clearly. Getting close to the hearer and checking for understanding are also important, even though getting closer and checking for understanding can be uncomfortable and might reveal that part of the problem was in your message. What was the signal supposed to be buried within the noise? It makes me think of the singer Frank, and it's spelled Phranc, who was once in the punk band Nervous Gender. In the LA punk scene of the early 1980s, Frank got very angry at the use of Nazi imagery as a form of punk shock aesthetic, and she wrote a song called Take Off Your Swastika to call attention to the problems of using Nazi imagery. However, she found it unsatisfying to sing the song with Nervous Gender because it was just one more loud song that people would slam dance to. No one was listening to the lyrics. At first, I imagined that it was really satisfying to scream, "Take off your swastika, it really nauseates me," through a microphone. But as I've discovered over the years of taking part in political marches, eventually screaming the same slogans can start to feel pointless. So Frank started playing Take Off Your Swastika with just an acoustic guitar and much quieter, though intense singing. She discovered that if she wanted to be heard, the best way to call attention to herself was actually to get quieter. Indeed, hearing her sing the lyrics, "Fascism isn't anarchy," with just her voice and acoustic guitar is quite powerful and more effective than screaming them over electric guitars while people slam dance. So what does this all have to do with Flannery O'Connor? I've identified the punk impulse in her work as this impulse to shout and draw large and startling pictures, and many people have found inspiration in these startling pictures. However, many have also misinterpreted her work, mistaking her intended meaning of the significance of the ineffable for the negation of nihilism. So at the top of my list, and I'm sure as many of you also have a list of what might have been had O'Connor lived longer, I wonder if she would have ever come to a conclusion similar to that of Frank and considered different, perhaps even quieter aesthetic and rhetorical strategies to convey meaning. Thank you.
All right, wonderful. Wonderful presentations. Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Irwin. So we have some time for Q&A, and if people want to put a question in the chat, that's fine, or a comment, or just go ahead and raise your hand if you'd like. Let me see if I can see everybody. Oh, there we go. Different views. I really enjoyed that. Thank you so much.
Mhm. Well, I'll take a stab at a question for both of you. About quality, about when somebody's being influenced, when a musician is being influenced by a writer. I imagine there are all sorts of ways to be influenced by a writer. And you've been looking at so many different musicians over your years of thinking about O'Connor this way. I would imagine you have, however indirectly, reached some sort of conclusions about what works and what doesn't. I don't think it's that you think understanding Flannery O'Connor's fiction properly is important to being inspired to make good music, but can you put your finger on anything that musicians do when they're reading O'Connor that does make for good music? I'm sorry, that took an awful long time to say. What works?
Well, I think that one thing that Irwin has talked about is she's just such a good storyteller, and so many people, Springsteen, Nick Cave, they all, say she can tell us, Bono, that she can tell a story. I mean, it's Irwin, it was Springsteen who sat down and wrote and read one whole book. Was It a Good Man Is Hard to Find before writing Nebraska?
That's right. He was given a copy of actually he was given a copy of the complete stories by Barbara Carr, the partner of his manager, John Landau. And he had seen John Huston's Wise Blood film, I think, around the same time. But I think that's one answer that I think applies to a number of writers. And Springsteen articulates that, and his first biographer, Dave Marsh, articulates that Springsteen saw O'Connor's ability just to use the small telling detail to reveal so much in her stories. And he said, well, I can translate some of that into my song lyrics. I can turn my song lyrics into stories. And if I just select the right significant details, I can tell a big story in the small space of a song lyric. So Mary Gauthier as well talked about O'Connor's art transforming some of her art. So I think there's that ground. It's very multiplex, Bruce. I sort of explain in my book just the various ways that a number of songwriters have responded to O'Connor and have been influenced by her. I mean, my overarching argument is this Christ hauntedness, as I argued in the paper here, that they identify. And in some cases, like the artist Father John Misty, they see themselves in some of O'Connor's characters, and some of their own responses to their religious upbringings somehow get validated and explained through O'Connor's characters who are responding within various forms of religious extremism or orthodoxy. So there's this personal identification with characters. I think Nick Cave is one of those, and Misty is another one of those. But I like the notion that, and Springsteen's very much, there's very considerable evidence that after reading O'Connor's fiction, those rather abstruse, Dylan-esque kind of lyrics on the first two albums, that he becomes a short story writer, and O'Connor does transform his lyrical art. So there's that on the one hand, and there's the overarching argument, I think, of the Christ hauntedness that many of these writers identify with in O'Connor. Monica, can you add more to that? It is very multiplex.
Sure. Yeah, I love your point about that she is the master of the perfect detail. And one of the things that I've written about, that when I first read O'Connor, what I loved about her is my family had moved away from Georgia in my senior year of high school. And then in college, I sat down and we read a couple of her stories in a class. And then I sat down and read all of Good Man is Hard to Find in one sitting, because she so captures a particular kind of Georgia, of landscape, of southernness. And in fact, in the article I wrote about R.E.M, I had asked Mike Mills, in R.E.M's early career, they were, being smart alecks, but when they were asked about their biggest musical influences, they would say, oh, we're not influenced by music. Flannery O'Connor is a much more important influence on us than any band. And so when I asked Mike Mills, well, what is it that you and Flannery O'Connor have in common? And he said, well, only southernness, which is such a great answer, because then I went, well, what is this southernness that is two data points, R.E.M and Flannery O'Connor? What is this southernness that they share? And I do think it is the way that she can evoke landscapes, and that her characters are so unusual, that, I wrote about, you could take a Flannery O'Connor character and put it in an R.E.M song, and you could take an R.E.M character and put it in a Flannery O'Connor story. And I think, in fact, in the 33 1/3 book on R.E.M's Murmur, there's an entire chapter on the history of the Southern Gothic, and particularly through literature that people see as a huge influence on them.
Here's something that Mary Gauthier said, and I think this might apply in a limited way maybe to Kate Campbell as well, and maybe others. She said that Flannery gave me the courage as a writer to go to some of the darker places in my own self and in my experience and in my own spiritual journey. So Flannery gave me both, she said, the courage and permission. That's a quote from Mary Gauthier. And I think that's a very, very remarkable thing to say, and considerable influence that O'Connor has had on the sensibilities of some writers. Again, I think Lucinda acknowledges something similar in saying my life is like a Gothic novel. You know, if you want to understand atonement and get right with God, go read Flannery O'Connor. I share this experience. And she's a writer that bears all in her songs too. Maybe doesn't need the permission to do that like Gauthier did, but Flannery is alongside saying, tell the truth and speak to the darkness that you're experiencing. And I think both Gauthier and Lucinda Williams.
And both Gauthier and Williams are like women who have defied genre categories. I mean, they've both written about, how are you going to, and ironically, their biggest hits are the ones that radio went, I don't know what to do with car wheels on a gravel road. But yeah, and I think that maybe O'Connor as a inspiration for that as well, because at the time people went, what is this? And readers then and now, continue to respond to it.
We have a comment in the chat or a question. Susan, you want to ask your question, or do you want me to read it?
Oh, read it, and then I'll ask it. You read it. I've gotten stage fright all of a sudden.
Okay, so Susan asks, did either of you look at the musicians who influenced O'Connor as she wrote her stories? I have researched, found songs, particularly blues and country, that she loved to listen to. A Good Man Is Hard to Find is a 1930s blues song that she loved.
Yeah, A Good Man Is Hard to Find. You always get the other kind, It was by Alberta Hunter, a blues singer of that early time, early 20s, late 20s and 30s. Saying that was a hit.
Written by somebody,
Yeah.
Eddie. Susan, there is an article somewhere that I started on this when I was looking for direction in the work I was doing that had ended up as Flannery at the Grammys. And I did go through and looked at some of the songs that, let's say, Ruby sings in the doctor's office, the Chuck Wagon Gang, gospel music. There's the hymns that are there in.
Yes. Oh, yeah, that's right.
Now, and of course, was she aware of really the Bessie Smith song? Had she heard the song, or apparently she'd read an article about a young woman who'd won a singing contest doing that, and I think she was grabbed by the name of the song. A Good Man Is Hard to Find. I don't know if the song itself might have influenced her. I don't think she references that anywhere. Is that anyone got any?
Well, this is good to know, but yes. Louise Abbott is my cousin, and she took me to Milledgeville one time, and had been invited to give the Flannery O'Connor Memorial Lecture for that year. And she told me that Flannery told her that she really liked that blues song, and also was a real fan of Patsy Cline.
Who did The Life You Saved May Be Your Own.
That is wonderful to hear.
Isn't that amazing? I built my lecture around the music of Flannery O'Connor from that perspective, from what she liked or was said to have liked from her friend Louise, and elsewhere. Little snippets were dotted in the libraries, that I consulted.
I would love to hear your paper on that, because I do think there's
if I can find it. I'd send it to you.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that too.
We'll send it to us at the Flannery O'Connor Institute, because we'd love to see that. Yeah.
And while she may not have been tuned into popular radio, she spent a lot of time in doctors' offices, right? And like Ruby, she's listening to the music that's piped in there, and
yeah, and she was at the Iowa workshop for a while, and then got exposed to some of the northern fascination with southern this bluesy southern stuff, and gospel too as well. So I'll send it along. I had trouble. It might have been you, Kate, that I was corresponding with yesterday by email, trying to get into the email function or trying to contact the library. But at the Institute.
The Institute is separate from the special collections, but I'll put
Yeah, put it
my
in
email
where I
up
should
for you
send
if
it.
you'd like. It's Katie. I'll just put it up here in the chat if you can see it, and you can just send it to me and I'll make sure.
Yes, I will. And
I mean, I'm personally
anyone else too,
interested in that date, you know, that anecdote that you told, because in December, I'm giving a talk on Flannery O'Connor and music as well, but it's more from the standpoint of the music that was in Middle Georgia that she was absorbing
at
in
the
the atmosphere
time.
here at the
Now,
time.
who would that be? Who's that blues singer that Bob Dylan said he liked, who's from Middle Georgia? He's a black man.
Yeah, there was a lot. There was, and Evan Levitt did a great, I'll put his link up. He's did a
Okay.
great digital archive on this, but there's all kinds of people. It was a big hotspot, according to Evan Levitt.
Yes, from Atlanta. There were a number of music publishers in Atlanta who were doing field recordings down in Middle Georgia. I'm from Atlanta. My mother went to school with Flannery O'Connor at the same time. And so she introduced me to, this is how I come by this. I'm just passionately and love it, every detail. So.
You know, Susan, I really appreciate your stories because there now we have this, you know, Flannery in her letters would like to say, oh, I have a 10 ear. I don't listen to music, the same way that she's like, oh, I'm just a hillbilly Thomist, you know, I'm not one of them intellectuals. And we know that she was an intellectual and widely read.
Yes.
And now I'm like, now we need to reconsider her whole like, oh, you know, I can't tell anything from the beat. It's either classical or the Beatles is the way that she characterized herself. And this is just apparently another one of her stories that she liked to paint herself.
Right. She liked to be self-deprecating, as I take it, you know, especially when she was out of her element in Iowa or Yaddo or elsewhere.
Because y'all know, when Ethan Hawke was introducing Wildcat in Atlanta, he talked about how at the beginning he was really excited about getting to do like a 50s soundtrack. And then he read that, well, Flannery O'Connor wasn't into music. And so he was very disappointed and changed the way they approached the music.
We'll have to talk. Everybody.
And you know, the thing is it was interesting because then he said that when he talked to the person who did the music that they wanted to evoke the sound of constant prayer, which I think makes for an interesting approach to a soundtrack. But again, it's so interesting that we have this image of that Flannery painted of herself of like, oh no, I don't like music, but goodness gracious, another thing that
and she was especially attracted to the crossover between black blues and white country, which appeared to be white because of the recording industry at the time recorded only white.
Right.
You know, and then got into the black recordings or recordings of black people as late as the 30s, but they had been recording for more than 12, 15 years of all white records before then. I'm just really into this whole thing with the Carter family and all these country and blues musicians, and then their connection with Flannery O'Connor is amazing to me.
Yeah,
I'm totally here for anything you want to talk about the Carter family.
Okay. Who said that? Was that you?
I did. Yeah.
Okay,
We'll just all come down for the Bluegrass Festival and
come to the Bluegrass Festival March 5th that week. We're having a Bluegrass Festival for the 100th birthday. I think you got on late, but if I can get your email, I'll make sure. Are you receiving our newsletters and stuff?
I would love that. I would love to come down for the 100th birthday and bluegrass and old time and blues, and you know, gotta get anyway. Yes, my email is susanketchen@mac.com. Should I put it in the chat?
It'd be great if you can do that. and then we'll make sure you're on the mailing list. But
Yeah.
I think a couple of us would like to pick your brain, if you don't
Oh,
mind.
I love it. No,
I'm
no.
writing about O'Connor and music too, and specifically the things you're
Yeah, well, yeah.
referencing.
That's wonderful. And oh, there's so much. There's more that Bruce Springsteen has said about the influence of her fiction on his work too. All right, there it is.
Great. Well, I have a question because I think, Irwin, you mentioned, you know, we've been referencing it here, this idea that, oh, I have a tin ear, I don't listen. But we know that she knew who the Beatles were. She obviously seems like she saw the Beatles. She had a TV, she had a radio, right? And we were recently received the gift of the mansion, the Klein house. There's a big radio on her desk in her bedroom. And so I also noticed there were 3 pianos in that house on Green Street. And I asked somebody what's with all the pianos? And they said one of her aunts, is this true, taught music lessons in the house when she lived there as a high school student. So this idea that I don't know anything about music, but then Chopin, it's one of those in this kind of detailed comment about Chopin, right? So it's just quite interesting to try to fill out and how people have been so influenced by a few statements she made to not even think, why wouldn't she know about the pop culture in her time when she was in college and high school? There were diners, there were jukeboxes. She mentions jukeboxes in her stories. She has songs, you know, but then this idea that, oh, I never listened to any music, I'm not influenced at all, just seems so strange. So I wonder, you know, what all, I mean, do you, Susan, have specific, like besides the Klein, specific songs that she liked that you know and she listened to, she mentioned?
Well, I mentioned Patsy Cline and a Good Man is hard to find, but all of those blues and early blues, early country, early old, what they called old time, which is, you know, and mountain music, were really captivated her imagination, I believe, because of the dialogue. She had such a beautiful ear. She didn't have a tin ear. She had an ear for how people speak and the cadence of it. So, and that's what the music is rooted in. If it's sung, blues and that sort of thing. And that was all over the radio anyway. So she would have been exposed.
Right. All over the radio.
So I'll go back and look some more because and I'll send to you the Bruce Springsteen article. Did you see him on CBS Sunday Morning? You know, the program on TV. He was talking about Flannery O'Connor a lot in that special interview that went over 2 sections or sessions of the CBS Sunday Morning show, 2 Sundays. They were talking about his most recent album, and he was showing his country home, the home of his childhood, and how much Flannery O'Connor. I'll send that to you too. I'll send it out. Well, whatever, anybody who sends me their email, I will, you've got mine. If you want to email me, I can send it back to you.
Great. We have another question. Oh, Irwin, you want to say something there? We have a question.
In response to Susan's comment about, you know, Springsteen still talking about Flannery O'Connor. I think this is something very distinctive about O'Connor's, what I call arc of influence. Influence, you know, in 1980, 82, he's reading O'Connor, and then he's still talking about her. And I mentioned, I think in the last in the paper given at Georgia College, that he and Martin Scorsese had a conversation here in 2019, I think 18, with the Netflix version of Springsteen on Broadway, and they both are talking about Flannery O'Connor at the time. Nick Cave is on record having recorded a song in which he name drops Flannery O'Connor, and the song is called Carnage. And Nick Cave is highly influenced in the mid-'80s in Berlin with O'Connor, and he's reread her just recently again to confirm in his own mind, in his words, why we should value her. Sufjan Stevens was influenced in the early 2000s by reading O'Connor and has the Seven Swans album. And then he's just come out with another album called Javelin, and he has a song called Everything That Rises Must Converge. And he's gone online in his blog saying that lines from the Prayer Journal could be the chapter headings for his autobiography, which would also take its line from the last lines of the Prayer Journal. There's nothing left to be said of me. So that's something interesting about O'Connor. Some of us may know other musicians who've had literary influence. I'm a big fan of Bruce Cockburn, Canadian musician, and he'll sometimes list people that he's been reading, but they have an influence for a time, and then he moves on and something else is there. O'Connor seems to have had this lasting arc of influence on individuals who encounter her. And I've argued that's because she has both a prophetic vision and a prophetic voice. It endures. It continues to influence these artists. So I think that's something quite distinctive about O'Connor's influence. It has carried over in some cases for more than 40 years in artists who had been impacted by her stories. They're seeing her imprint in their creative work and in their sensibilities. It's been transformative for them, and continue to acknowledge that transformation.
Yeah.
I agree. And it even a greater influence than, well, we could have a good conversation, even a greater length of influence and breadth, breadth of influence than even 40 years. I think it's longer than that.
Yeah. We have a few other questions here. A comment by Rachel Wall, just put it out. I remember at Andalusia that one of the guides said Flannery O'Connor's records gifted to her were unopened, but then Colin Cutler checked them and found they had been opened actually. Okay, great. That's what and then Heidi Johnson says Bob Dylan grew up in my neck of the woods in Minnesota and lived in my hometown for a while. He mentions Blind Willie McTell. Blind Willie McTell was a street blues performer from Atlanta who actually died in Milledgeville. He was, I don't know if he was performing there. He died at Central State. John Dunaway, has anyone found evidence that Flannery influenced Johnny Cash?
I know that Roseanne Cash, his daughter, is a fan. She has cited, you shall know the truth and the truth shall make you odd. And I imagine that she probably, I know she has written about how her father was gave her lots of, you read this, listen to this, and she got a lot of her taste in music and books from her dad. So it's very possible that she learned about O'Connor from her dad.
Yeah.
Wasn't he interested in jazz, it seems like?
I think he was interested in everything.
Could be.
I just want to thank Monica and Irwin, because I tuned into this thinking, this may interest me, it may not, because I don't know a lot of these artists, the punk and, Springsteen, I don't even know very well. But a friend had just sent me that Andrew Greeley online article about Springsteen as a Catholic bard, and my dear mentor Wallace Fowley, who was like a second father to me, had this same kind of approach. It strikes me as interesting because one time he got a letter from Jim Morrison, and Jim said, "Thank you for your translation of Arthur Rimbaud, the French symbolist poet, because I never would have written half the songs I wrote without Rimbaud's influence." And so Fowley ended up writing a whole book about Rimbaud and Jim Morrison, and it sold more copies than anything he ever wrote. He wrote dozens of books. it was translated in about 5, 6, 7 languages. And he toured the whole country giving his lecture on Arthur Rimbaud and Jim Morrison, and students just loved it. So you guys, you need to get on the tour too.
Mhm.
Well, it's funny because, you know, Jim Morrison is what took me to Rimbaud. So
John, I
It
appreciate
can
your
happen.
comment because it shows how much work there is to be done. And just listening to Susan and Katie too, there is a lot to be done in O'Connor's influence on popular culture, popular music in particular. I had originally, had just in fact, I have stuff on YouTube that I didn't get in the book. I was just getting too big. There's someone in the U2 organization talked about the extent to which Bono was influenced by O'Connor, and I quote something after. And there's a
I'm
photo
not surprised.
in the book that shows Bono with Bruce Springsteen. I think I can find that. Yes, look, Bono
Right.
and Springsteen. The photographer who took that says Bruce Springsteen is speaking to 19, 20-year-old Bono at the Hammersmith Ballet in London and saying, conflicted Irish boy with, Protestant mother and Catholic father, you should read Flannery O'Connor. And Bono goes on record and saying, there's never been an author that has so influenced me. And I was in correspondence with someone in the U2 organization who said, you could write a book on Bono's influence, on O'Connor's influence on Bono, including certain personas, dark personas that he took on stage, if you know the Fly. And I started to write about that. And, I couldn't get too far with it. But just to say, there is so much out there, Bruce, that could make its way into the Flannery O'Connor Bulletin review and other places on the various ways in which O'Connor has had this reach within popular music. And it's exciting to hear the things that Susan is saying and that Katie's saying as well.
well, just today, a cousin texted me to say, you mentioned just popular culture itself, that apparently I never watched Lost, but the TV show Lost, apparently somebody is reading Everything That Rises Must Converge. And strangely enough, in the Tales of the City adaptation on Netflix, in the 50s, Mrs. Madrigal goes to City Lights bookstore and they talk about Flannery O'Connor.
City Lights is where Bono got his copies of O'Connor's works as he was recording the Joshua Tree in LA. I just discovered that in his autobiography, the book was in final edit. Wow, I was reading Bono's autobiography. He says, "Oh, this is where I picked up O'Connor's stuff," and he composes lyrics somewhat organically in the studio through some form of glossolalia. So what he'd been reading in O'Connor comes out in the songs on the Joshua Tree. Of course, John, the book is called Flannery at the Grammys because in acknowledging the influences on that album when they got their second Grammy in the 1988 Grammys, they mentioned O'Connor, fourth from the top on the list of influences that began with Bishop Desmond Tutu, Martin Luther King, Bob Dylan, and next Flannery. So that indicates the depth of influence that she had on the sensibilities of the songwriting on that album. And I would argue, as someone has said in the U2 organization, on other ways in which Bono was influenced, and even through certain forms of stagecraft and characters that he created through O'Connor's own art and fiction. Someone needs to write that. It won't be me.
That's fascinating.
Wow. Thank you all. This has been just quite an engaging, very interesting talk. Q&A, and we really appreciate both Irwin and Monica coming. Thank you so much for your work. Their books are available. And any last words here, Bruce, that you want to leave us with? Yeah, to be continued. So December, I forgot to mention this, but December 3rd, I'll give a talk on, started out Driving While Black. It's on a Good Man Is Hard to Find, but I traced that song. Susan, there's 150 extant versions of that song, and I traced that song and sort of try to create a context for that story using that song. So
Really?
yes.
Golly, y'all are so talented.
That'll be
So we
great, Katie.
really-
I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, no, it's a work in progress, but it's sort of like she was influenced and then she's influencing. And so she's sort of the space where all this is happening. It's really cool.
Do you think that the movie that Ethan Hawke did has made it go to a different level? More fingers going out into the culture?
Absolutely. Yeah. Maya Hawke's a musician, you know?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, she's a musician. She has 2 albums. She's recorded in Atlanta. I mean, I can just tell you anecdotally that film is reaching a different generation audience. So I have my friend Rachel here. Her 14-year-old daughter saw the film, you know, at my suggestion, and is really into punk and went and bought O'Connor's entire collected works, right? Or her collected stories. So it's definitely reaching a different demographic and showing, you know, the people who love. I mean, apparently, I don't know, Monica, how it was in Atlanta, but in Savannah, when they showed the film at SCAD and Ethan Hawke was there, but Maya was like a surprise. And when Maya was announced that Maya was there, students flooded in, 2,000 students. You got to be here. You got to be here. Maya Hawke's here. So,
She did a great job in that movie. I was amazed.
did you want to say something, Rachel?
I did. I just, it's, thanks for bringing that up about my daughter. I was feeling this movement to want to just share. This is so cool for me, right? So I was a street punk when I was a teenager, right? Like I lived on the street. I was a total gutter punk, you know. Most people like me are not alive anymore. And I was graced to be plucked out of that. And I went to college after not even going to high school, right? And Flannery O'Connor, when I got to read, I took some literature class and I was like, it's okay to be me. You know, like it lives in academia. You know, it was like reading her stories, the grotesque and the very real, as was pointed out, like the child's drawing, right? Her depiction of the grotesque and the layers of everything going on, including spiritually, was so significant to me that things like that, you know, are so important for people. It's just so important for people. And in my particular case, it was like, oh, I can keep doing this, you know? So she was really significant to me. And then it's so cool how my daughter is now, you know, gratefully doesn't have the kind of life I had, but she's a little punkling, you know? And how she's found Flannery and just is so exhilarated by the same layered topics. And she's so interested in, you know, she's a riot girl. And so she's really into, you know, feminism and intersectional feminism. And Flannery O'Connor's right there in that matrix. So I just wanted to say how relevant it is. And she is in so many ways.
That's so cool because Rachel's in California. This is out of the South. So some people say what we have in common is the South, but me too. I encountered O'Connor at UC Berkeley and wrote my thesis as an undergrad. I'd never been to Georgia, never been to the South. And she spoke to me, you know, and so.
There's a great essay online where somebody talks about being a Joy Helga girl and that take me as I am, like this is who I am, mom.
She took the PhD, but it didn't bring her out in. That's what Joy Holga's neighbor said that about Joy. She took the PhD, but it didn't bring her out any.
And, you know, I've had students in my classes who, you know, after reading Revelation are like, there are some people I would like to throw some books at.
Yes,
so we get, and something I've written about is, you know, Flannery gave us angry young women, and we don't, you know, we don't have a lot of images of angry young women. And I first read her when I was 19 and went, that, you know, I haven't seen a lot of like girls who throw things in stories.
That's a really good point.
Especially, well, in the store here in Chapel Hill, they have a little stuffed warthog with a little speaker inside. You squeeze him or throw him and he goes, you know, he grunts like a warthog. And it's directly from the story, I think.
Oh my God. Well, guys so much. Thanks for, again, Irwin and Monica and all the people who left, and we'll just, to be continued, right? I think there's just a lot to talk about. And thank you for coming. I hate to cut it off. I'm just enjoying this so much.
For the readers.
Thanks, y'all.
I'm
Give
just
us a
looking
big
forward
break
to,
from the election.
Yeah,
seeing more criticism.
I'll go on. Wait, what? I'm sorry. Everyone's talking.
I just wanted to say, I just look forward to seeing more criticism that explores the many ways in which O'Connor has had a reach into popular music and popular culture. And I think that's a growing field now. And it's nice. It's so interesting to hear the perspectives and voices of others here on that. I look forward to reading things as they emerge.
Super exciting. I agree. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Stay in touch or let me get y'all's emails because I want to send you things.
Susan, I'll
Thanks for
email
putting
you. I
this
wrote it
together.
down.
And I wrote your email down and I'll email you.
Okay, good.
I follow the
Thank
piece hearing that Flannery is influenced by Patsy Cline. I think that's just an astounding thing.
We need that in
One of
print.
her
so we can
favorite- you know,
type
I'm
it up.
crazy for trying. I'm crazy for crying, and I'm crazy for loving you. That's
Well,
great.
she also did The Life You
O'Connor.
Saved Mel Be Your Own. So I always, when I read it, I hear Patsy Cline singing it. So
Mhm.
Awesome.
all right, good night, y'all.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks.